Always forced to be the family slave since childhood, my wife, parents, and brother skipped my birthday at the last minute. Oh, we got invited to a party. Having so much fun, I forgot your birthday. My wife laughed. I vowed never to see my family again. But 3 years later. Look, I'm not saying I was born with a kick me sign taped to my back, but I'm also not saying the universe didn't have a weird sense of humor when it shipped me to the Reed family. My name's Noah Reed. I'm 30 years old, and if there was ever a professional certification for being a doormat with a pulse, I'd have a framed diploma hanging in my non-existent office. Actually, scratch that. I'd probably let my brother use it as a coaster for his overpriced whiskey. Let me paint you a picture of the Reed family dynasty, and I use that term as loosely as my father uses the word proud when describing me. At the top of this dysfunctional food chain sits my dad, Richard Reed. A man so emotionally constipated that I'm pretty sure he thinks feelings are a line item you can deduct from your taxes. He's corporate through and through, the kind of guy who wears a three-piece suit to backyard barbecues and probably irons his pajamas. I've seen him cry exactly once, and that was when the stock market took a dive in 2008. Not at my high school graduation. Not when I got married. The Dow Jones, people. That's what cracked the vault. Then there's my mother, Martha Reed, who treats social status like it's oxygen, and she's got asthma. The woman can organize a charity luncheon faster than most people can order pizza, and she knows exactly which fork to use for every possible scenario, including, I suspect, stabbing someone who uses the wrong one. Her entire existence revolves around what the neighbors think, what her book club thinks, and whether her latest Instagram post of her rustic farmhouse kitchen, spoiler, we live in the suburbs, got enough likes. I'm pretty sure she measures her self-worth in engagement rates. And then there's Eli. Oh, Eli. My younger brother, the golden retriever of the family, and I mean that in the most literal sense. He's handsome in that annoying, effortless way that makes you want to punch a wall. He's never met a responsibility he couldn't dodge, and he has the attention span of a goldfish on Red Bull. If privilege was a person, it would be Eli, sitting on a yacht he didn't pay for, drinking champagne he can't pronounce, while someone else, spoiler alert, it's me, handles his tax returns because he thinks a W-2 is a droid from Star Wars. Growing up in the Reed household was like being cast in a sitcom where I was the laugh track, not the star. When we were kids, Eli got birthday parties that looked like Pinterest threw up glitter and joy all over our backyard. We're talking magicians, pony rides, bounce houses, the works. Parents from 3 zip codes over would show up with presents wrapped in paper that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Meanwhile, my birthdays? Let's just say they were more of a here's a cupcake, now go help your father install that ceiling fan kind of vibe. I spent my 7th birthday holding a flashlight in a crawl space while my dad cursed at electrical wiring. Happy birthday to me, I guess. The pattern didn't exactly break as we got older. It calcified like plaque in an artery. Eli got a car for his 16th birthday, a cherry red convertible that he immediately crashed into a mailbox because he was too busy taking selfies to notice stop signs exist. Did he get in trouble? Nah. Dad just sighed, called the insurance company, and bought him another one. I got a bike, a used bike, that I had to assemble myself, from a box, with missing parts. I'm pretty sure one of the wheels was a Pentagon. Fast forward to adulthood, and you'd think things would change, right? You'd think a grown man with his own job, his own life, his own identity, would be free from the gravitational pull of family dysfunction. Wrong. So incredibly wrong. I became the family's unpaid handyman, therapist, accountant, IT department, and emotional support animal all rolled into one exhausted package. My dad's kitchen sink springs a leak at 2 in the morning. I'm getting a call. My mom's laptop won't connect to Wi-Fi because she accidentally turned off the router again. Guess who's driving across town? Eli needs someone to proofread his resume for the 15th job he's going to bomb the interview for. You guessed it, yours truly. And what did I get in return for this decades-long marathon of servitude? Gratitude? Money? Thanks, Noah. You're literally holding this family together with duct tape and denial. Nope. I got paid in the world's most useless currency, empty compliments. You're such a good son, my mom would say, patting my hand like I was a golden retriever who'd just fetched the newspaper. We couldn't do this without you, my dad would mutter, already walking away before the sentence finished. And Eli? Eli would just grin and say, "You're the best, bro," while handing me another problem to solve, like I was some kind of human vending machine for solutions. If loyalty had a union, I'd be the mascot. Hell, I'd be on the poster. They'd use my face to guilt trip other people into staying in toxic situations. Be like Noah, the caption would read. Devoted to a fault. Literally. So when I finally got married to Rachel, my college sweetheart, the girl I thought was going to be my escape hatch from this circus, I genuinely believed things would change. I thought, okay, Noah, new chapter. You're building your own family now. You're going to have someone who actually sees you, appreciates you, prioritizes you. I had this whole fantasy cooked up where Rachel and I would move to a little house with a white fence, maybe get a dog, host dinner parties where people actually remembered my name. I was going to be a husband, not a butler. A partner, not a problem solver. Yeah, right. Turns out I didn't escape anything. I just traded one set of bosses for another, swapped one gilded cage for a slightly different one with better wallpaper. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about marrying someone who grew up in the same social circle as your family. They've been taking notes. They've learned all the plays. They know exactly which buttons to push, which guilt trips work, and how to make you feel like you're crazy for expecting the bare minimum. Rachel fit into my family like a puzzle piece I didn't know was missing, which should have been my first, second, and third red flag all rolled into a banner I could have seen from space. But did I see it? Nope. I was too busy being the good son, the good brother, and now the good husband, because that's what Noah Reid does. Noah Reid shows up. Noah Reid fixes things. Noah Reid makes everyone else's life easier while his own crumbles like a stale cookie nobody wanted in the first place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I spent the first 30 years of my life. As the family butler, the designated fixer, the guy everyone forgot about until they needed something. Spoiler alert. It doesn't get better before it gets worse. Rachel Matthews. Well, Rachel Reid after we got married, though she kept her maiden name on social media because it has better SEO, is the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately becomes its center of gravity. I'm not even exaggerating. She's got this thing about her, this magnetic pull that makes people lean in when she talks, laugh at her jokes even when they're not that funny, and generally treat her like she's the main character in everyone's story. And look, I get it. She's objectively gorgeous. We're talking the kind of pretty that makes strangers do double takes and walk into parking meters. Long dark hair that somehow always looks professionally styled even when she claims she just woke up like this. Green eyes that could sell ice to penguins, and a smile that belonged on toothpaste commercials. She knew it, too. Oh, she absolutely knew it. When we met in college, I was a sophomore struggling through an economics class I had no business taking. And she was the girl everyone wanted to sit next to. Not because she was smart, though she was, but because being associated with Rachel Matthews gave you social currency. It was like carrying around a black card, except instead of unlimited spending, you got unlimited invitations to parties you'd never be cool enough to attend on your own. I still don't know what she saw in me back then. I was average looking on a good day, perpetually tired from working 2 part-time jobs to afford textbooks. And my idea of a wild Friday night was getting through my calculus homework without crying. But somehow, miraculously, she picked me. We started dating, and for a while, a glorious, naive while, I thought I'd won the lottery. Here's what I didn't realize at the time. Rachel didn't fall in love with me. She fell in love with the idea of someone who would worship her without requiring much maintenance in return. I was the perfect accessory, the reliable boyfriend who'd carry her books, drive her to parties, take cute couple photos for her Instagram, and never complain when she spent 3 hours getting ready while I sat in the car listening to true crime podcasts. I was so busy feeling grateful that someone like her would date someone like me that I completely missed the neon sign spelling out, "This is a bad idea," in letters the size of billboards. The really tragic part? She grew up in the same social circle as my family. Her parents knew my parents from the country club, that godforsaken place where people pay thousands of dollars annually to eat mediocre salmon and pretend they enjoy golf. Rachel and Eli had actually gone to the same private high school, which meant they had this shared language of inside jokes and remember whens that I was permanently excluded from because I'd gone to public school like a peasant. My family absolutely adored her from day one. My mom practically threw a parade when I brought Rachel home for the first time. She's so refined, my mother gushed, which was code for she knows which silver spoon to use. My dad approved because Rachel's father was some big-shot attorney, and networking is basically my dad's love language. And Eli? Eli thought she was hilarious because she could match him joke for joke, insult for insult, and had a laugh that could shatter wine glasses in a 3-block radius. That laugh. God, that laugh. It wasn't a delicate giggle or a cute chuckle. It was a full-body, earthquake-inducing cackle that announced her presence before she even entered a room. At family dinners, she and my mother would gossip like they were auditioning for a reality show, trading stories about people I'd never met and didn't care about, their laughter bouncing off the walls while I sat there moving food around my plate like a kid who'd been grounded. My dad would nod approvingly, probably thinking about how this alliance would strengthen the family's social standing or whatever Machiavellian nonsense he obsessed over. And Eli would join in, cracking jokes at my expense while Rachel laughed along, never once thinking to defend me or even acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't cool to roast her husband like he was a Comedy Central special. In the early years of our marriage, I genuinely thought we were solid. I really did. I'd come home from work. Back when I was still trying to climb the ladder at my dad's company, a soul-crushing endeavor that deserves its own therapy session, and I'd cook dinner. Not fancy stuff, but decent meals. Pasta with homemade sauce, grilled chicken with vegetables, occasionally attempting something ambitious like risotto that would inevitably turn into expensive rice porridge. I'd set the table, light candles, the whole 9 yards. And Rachel would come home, take a picture of the setup, post it on Instagram with some caption like, "Dinner goals, smiling face with hard eye sparkles," and rack up hundreds of likes from people who thought she'd cooked it herself. Did she mention me? Tag me? Acknowledge that I existed? Not once. I was the ghost chef, the invisible husband, the man behind the curtain who everyone forgot to thank when the show ended. My therapist, and by therapist, I mean the ungodly hours I spent Googling things like, "Why doesn't my wife appreciate me?" at 2 in the morning, would probably call it invisible husband syndrome. I'd plan surprise date nights, book reservations at restaurants we couldn't really afford, buy her flowers for no reason other than it was Tuesday, and she'd post about all of it online like it was content she'd generated herself. Treated myself to a spa day, her caption would read, conveniently omitting that I'd paid for it, and spent that same day cleaning out the gutters. Best date night. Another post proclaimed, showing her dressed to the nines while I was cropped out of the photo like a photobombing stranger. But I kept giving. That's what I did, what I'd always done, because giving was the only language I spoke fluently. I paid the bills, all of them. Rent, utilities, her car payment, her credit card debt that mysteriously grew every month like some kind of financial cancer. I mowed the lawn every Saturday, even though we lived in a rental and technically the landlord was supposed to handle it. I fixed light bulbs, unclogged drains, assembled furniture from boxes with instructions written in what I can only assume was ancient hieroglyphics. I endured family dinners where my brother would call me Mr. Errand Boy, while Rachel laughed, actually laughed, like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. "He's not wrong," she'd say, nudging me with her elbow like we were in on the joke together, except I was the joke, and she was the comedian getting applause. I'd smile through it all, play along, pretend it didn't bother me that my own wife treated me like a particularly useful piece of furniture. A couch that could cook, maybe. An ottoman that paid taxes. I told myself it would get better, that we were just going through a rough patch, that all marriages required sacrifice and compromise. What I didn't realize was that I was the only one sacrificing anything, and the compromise was me slowly erasing myself until there was nothing left but a ghost in a husband costume. All I wanted, and I mean this with every exhausted fiber of my being, was one day where I felt seen. One day where Rachel looked at me like I was a person and not a personal assistant she'd accidentally married. One day where my family acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be celebrated instead of utilized. Was that too much to ask? Apparently yes, because the universe had other plans, and those plans involved my 30th birthday becoming the punchline to a joke I didn't know I was part of until it was way too late. I woke up on my 30th birthday feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Actual, genuine optimism. I know, rookie mistake. Optimism and the Reed family go together like pineapple on pizza, which is to say some people swear by it, but most rational humans know it's a crime against nature. But there I was, opening my eyes to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, thinking maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. 30 felt like a milestone, you know? Like the universe owed me something for surviving 3 decades of being everyone's backup dancer. I wasn't expecting a parade or anything, though honestly, after 30 years of service, a small marching band wouldn't have been unreasonable, but I figured at minimum I'd get acknowledged. A card, a cupcake, literally anything that proved I existed as more than a household appliance. Rachel was already awake when I shuffled into the kitchen, which should have been my first clue that something was off because that woman treated mornings like they were personally offensive to her. She usually rolled out of bed around 10, complained about being tired despite sleeping 11 hours, and then spent 45 minutes deciding which athleisure outfit to wear while not exercising. But that morning, she was up, dressed, and smiling at me in a way that made my stupid, hopeful heart do a little flip. "Morning, babe," she said, and I swear there was something conspiratorial in her voice, like she was holding on to a secret she couldn't wait to reveal. "Don't make any plans tonight, okay? I've got something special planned." Something special. Those 2 words carried me through the entire day like a life raft in an ocean of mundane responsibilities. I went to work, still grinding away at my dad's company, still being the only person who actually showed up on time. And every email I answered, every spreadsheet I updated, every tedious meeting I sat through, I kept thinking about those words. Something special. Maybe she'd actually remembered. Maybe she'd planned a surprise party with my friends, assuming I still had friends after years of canceling plans to fix my family's problems. Maybe she'd cooked dinner, which would have been a miracle on par with loaves and fishes considering her idea of cooking was reheating takeout. Maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get to feel like I mattered. By the time I got home around 6, I was practically vibrating with anticipation. I'd stopped at the store on the way and grabbed ingredients for a nice dinner. Nothing fancy, just some good steaks, potatoes, the fixings for a salad, a decent bottle of wine. I figured even if Rachel had something planned, we'd need to eat, and I might as well contribute since that's basically my entire personality at this point. I set everything up in the kitchen, changed into a nicer shirt, and waited. The house was weirdly quiet. No decorations, no balloons, no streamers, no hand-drawn happy birthday banner made by someone who cared enough to spend 5 minutes with a Sharpie. Just silence and the hum of the refrigerator, which honestly felt like a metaphor for my entire existence. 7 o'clock rolled around. Then 7:30. Then 8. I texted Rachel, trying to keep it casual, trying not to sound like a desperate kid waiting to be picked up from soccer practice after everyone else had already gone home. "Hey, what time should I be ready?" Smiling face with smiling eyes. I even included a smiley emoji, which physically hurt to type because I'm a grown man and emojis make me feel like I'm trying too hard. But I wanted to seem upbeat and not at all like someone who was starting to suspect he'd been forgotten again. The response came 20 minutes later. 20 minutes. I watched those 3 little dots appear and disappear about 6 times before the message finally came through, and when it did, I felt something inside me crack like ice on a frozen lake. "Oh shoot, forgot to tell you, your mom and dad invited me and Eli to a party. Some fancy charity thing at the club. Black tie event. I'll bring you cake tomorrow, promise." Face blowing a kiss. I read that message 3 times, each read-through adding another layer of what I can only describe as cartoonish disbelief. They'd all gone. Together. To a party. On my birthday. Without me. My wife, my parents, my brother. The entire starting lineup of people who were supposed to give a damn about my existence had dressed up in their finest clothes and gone to a party at the country club, and not one of them thought to mention it to me. Not one of them considered that maybe, possibly, the birthday boy should be invited to literally anything happening on his birthday. And Rachel's response? The verbal equivalent of patting me on the head and promising a treat later like I was a dog who'd been good. About staying home alone. I sat on the couch for a solid 10 minutes, just staring at my phone, waiting for the punchline. Surely this was a joke, right? Some elaborate setup for a surprise that would make sense later? Any second now, they'd all burst through the door yelling surprise, and I'd laugh at how gullible I'd been, how I'd actually believe they could forget me on my 30th birthday. Any second now. Any second. The seconds turned into minutes, and the minutes confirmed what I already knew deep down. This wasn't a joke. This was just my life, presented in its purest, most distilled form. Milo, my golden retriever, the only family member who'd never forgotten my birthday, because dogs don't know what birthdays are and love you unconditionally regardless, patted over and put his head on my knee. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes that somehow conveyed both sympathy and confusion, like he couldn't understand why I was sitting in the dark when there were perfectly good tennis balls that needed throwing. Bro, this is sad. His expression seemed to say, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. I scratched behind his ears and tried to convince myself this was fine, totally fine, just another day in the Reed family saga. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with an incoming photo. I shouldn't have looked. I absolutely should not have looked. But of course I did, because I'm apparently a masochist who enjoys emotional self-harm. It was a selfie from Rachel, taken at the country club, and she looked absolutely stunning in a red dress I'd never seen before, which meant she'd gone shopping and somehow forgot to mention it. She was grinning like she'd just won the lottery, holding a champagne flute that probably cost more than my entire birthday dinner, still sitting untouched in the kitchen. Standing next to her, also grinning, were my mom in her pearls and my dad in a tuxedo, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. And there, in the background, slightly out of focus but definitely identifiable, was Eli chatting up some blonde who was way out of his league. The caption read, "Having so much fun at this charity gala. Totally forgot it was Noah's birthday, face with tears of joy, oops. Love you, babe." She put a laughing emoji. A laughing emoji. Like forgetting your husband's 30th birthday was a hilarious mix-up, a silly little hoopsie-daisy that we'd all laugh about later over brunch. And she'd posted it publicly, which meant approximately 300 people now knew that Rachel Reed had forgotten her husband existed on the one day a year where forgetting someone is literally the worst thing you can do. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, sitting there in the dark with my dog in my disappointment, and it was the kind of laugh that sounds like something dying. You know that noise a vacuum cleaner makes right before it gives up completely? That rattling, wheezing sound that tells you it's about to become an expensive paperweight. That's what came out of my mouth. Milo tilted his head, concerned, probably wondering if he should call 911 or if I'd just completely lost my mind. Honestly, it could have gone either way. Here's the thing about breaking points that nobody tells you. They're not loud. They don't come with explosions or dramatic music or the sound of plates shattering against walls like you see in movies. There's no moment where you stand up, flip a table, and deliver some epic monologue about how you've been wronged while everyone watches in stunned silence. Real breaking points are quiet. They're the sound of a candle being blown out at midnight. They're the absence of noise where celebration should be. They're sitting in your kitchen at 10:30 on a Thursday night, staring at a dinner you cooked for 6 people who never showed up, and feeling something inside you just stop. I didn't cry. I think I was beyond crying at that point, like I'd exceeded my lifetime quota of tears and my body had just given up on producing them. I didn't yell or punch anything or do whatever it is people do when they're having an emotional breakdown. I just sat there at the dining table I'd set hours earlier, looking at the 6 place settings I'd arranged like some kind of optimistic idiot. 6 plates. 6 sets of silverware. 6 wine glasses. 6 napkins folded into those fancy triangles I'd learned from a YouTube video because I wanted everything to be perfect. I'd even put out the good tablecloth, the one we usually reserve for Thanksgiving, because I thought my 30th birthday warranted something special. The steaks had gone cold hours ago, congealing in their own juices on the serving platter. The salad had wilted into a sad pile of brown lettuce. The potatoes sat there like accusations. The wine remained unopened because apparently drinking alone on your forgotten birthday crosses some kind of line from pathetic into concerning, and I wasn't quite ready to take that leap yet. Milo had given up on me around 9:30 and gone to his bed in the corner, probably exhausted from trying to figure out why his human was acting like a malfunctioning robot. Even the dog knew something was fundamentally broken about this situation, and dogs think eating garbage is a reasonable life choice. That's how bad it was. I'd managed to depress a golden retriever, an animal species genetically engineered to be happy about literally everything. I picked up my phone and looked at Rachel's post again, which was like picking at a scab, except the scab was my entire sense of self-worth. The comments had started rolling in. "Gorgeous," someone wrote. "You look amazing," said another. "Such a fun night," chimed in a third. My mother-in-law had commented with a string of heart emojis. My own mother had replied with such a lovely evening, complete with a champagne glass emoji, which meant she'd taken the time to find the right emoji while somehow not finding the time to remember her oldest son's birthday. Eli had tagged himself in the photo and added, "Read family representing," because of course he had. Not a single person in those comments had said, "Hey, wait, isn't it Noah's birthday?" Not one. It was like I existed in some parallel dimension where I could see everyone else, but nobody could see me, like I was the ghost of husbands past haunting my own life. The realization hit me somewhere around 11 o'clock, settling into my bones like cold water. I wasn't a son or a brother or a husband to these people. I was a service. I was the emergency contact they called when something broke. I was the guy who showed up with tools and solutions and the ability to make problems disappear without complaining too much. I was a handyman, a fixer, a mobile support system that required no maintenance and apparently no celebration. You don't throw birthday parties for your dishwasher. You don't celebrate your garbage disposal's anniversary. You just use them when you need them and forget they exist the rest of the time. And maybe once a year you remember to feel vaguely grateful that they're still functioning. 30 years. I'd given these people 30 years of showing up, helping out, being reliable, being the good son and the good brother and the good husband. And what did I have to show for it? A cold steak dinner and a text message that said, "Oops." Like forgetting me was a charming personality quirk instead of a pattern of behavior that had been repeating itself since I was old enough to hold a flashlight in a crawl space. At 11:45, I got up and started putting the food away because that's what I do. I clean up messes, even the emotional ones. I scraped the steaks into Milo's bowl because at least someone would appreciate them, and watching him devour them with the enthusiasm of someone who actually gave a damn about my efforts made me feel marginally less pathetic. I washed the dishes, folded the tablecloth, put away the wine glasses, and transformed the scene of my disappointing birthday back into a regular kitchen where nothing sad had happened. Magic. By the time I was done, it was 11:58, which meant I had approximately 2 minutes left of being 29, 2 minutes left of being able to say, well, at least this year can't get worse. I opened the pantry and stared at its contents like I was hoping the meaning of life would be hiding behind the cereal boxes. We didn't have cake. We didn't have cupcakes. We didn't even have those sad little Hostess things you buy at gas stations when you're trying to be celebratory on a budget. What we did have was bread, and honestly, at that point bread was going to have to be enough because the universe clearly wasn't interested in giving me anything better. I took out 2 slices of white bread, the cheap stuff, the kind that tastes like air and regret, and found a single birthday candle in the junk drawer, left over from someone else's celebration. I put the bread on a plate, stuck the candle in the center like I was planting a flag on the saddest mountain ever climbed, and lit it with a lighter I kept around for the grill I never got to use because I was always too busy fixing other people's problems to cook for myself. The flame flickered in the dark kitchen, casting weird shadows on the walls, and I watched it dance for a moment while the clock on the microwave ticked over to midnight. "Happy birthday, champ," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. It felt like speaking at a funeral, which I guess it was in a way. I was mourning the death of whatever hope I'd been carrying around that things would change, that I'd eventually get what I deserved for being loyal and reliable and good. I was burying the version of myself that still believed effort equaled reward, that showing up meant being seen, that loving people meant they'd love you back the same way. I blew out the candle, and in that moment, that exact, precise, crystalline moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. It wasn't dramatic. There was no revelation accompanied by choir music or sudden clarity that hit like lightning. It was quieter than that, more permanent. It was the sound of a door closing that I'd been trying to keep open for 3 decades. It was the feeling of a weight lifting that I didn't know I'd been carrying. It was the simple, clear, undeniable knowledge that I was done. Done being the family butler. Done being the emergency contact. Done being the punchline. Done being invisible. Done being grateful for scraps of attention from people who should have been grateful for me. Done waiting for them to change when the only person who needed to change was me, and the change I needed was to leave. No shouting. No throwing things. No dramatic exit speeches or burned bridges or final confrontations where I laid out exactly how much they'd hurt me and demanded apologies I'd never get. Just silence and certainty and a piece of bread with a candle in it sitting on a plate in a dark kitchen. That was my breaking point. That was my line in the sand. That was the moment Noah Reed, professional doormat, family handyman, invisible husband, decided to become someone else entirely. I ate the bread. It tasted like cardboard and freedom. Milo looked up from his bed, probably wondering if I'd finally lost it completely, and maybe I had. But for the first time in 30 years, losing it felt exactly like finding myself. Leaving a marriage, a family, and an entire life behind requires a certain amount of planning, especially when you're trying to do it without tipping anyone off that you're about to pull a Houdini. The 2 weeks following my bread candle birthday were possibly the most surreal 14 days of my existence. Like I was living in one of those heist movies where the crew has to act normal while secretly plotting the crime of the century. Except my crime was just wanting to exist somewhere that didn't treat me like a particularly useful appliance. Rachel came home around 2 in the morning on my actual birthday, stumbling through the door in her fancy red dress with makeup smeared under her eyes and smelling like a champagne factory had exploded. She found me on the couch, still awake because sleep felt impossible when your entire worldview had just been rearranged like furniture in a room you thought you knew. "Babe," she slurred, kicking off her heels and nearly taking out a lamp in the process. "You should have been there. It was amazing. Your mom says hi, by the way. Oh, and I got you cake." She held up a styrofoam container with what I assume was supposed to be cake, but looked more like it had been through a war. "The waiter gave it to me for free because I told him it was your birthday. Isn't that sweet?" "Super sweet," I said, and my voice must have sounded normal enough because she didn't notice anything wrong. That's when I realized I could have told her I was planning to fake my own death and move to Argentina, and she probably would have said, "That's nice, babe," and scrolled through her phone. She passed out 30 seconds later, still wearing the dress, snoring like a chainsaw cutting through the silence of my dying marriage. The next morning, I started planning. Step 1 was figuring out where the hell I was going, because running away is significantly less dramatic when you don't actually have anywhere to run to. I scrolled through my contacts. And Jesus, when did my contact list become so depressing? It was basically just family members, Rachel's friends who I'd never actually had a real conversation with, and a handful of people from college I hadn't spoken to in years because I'd been too busy being everyone's handyman to maintain actual friendships. But then I found it. Marcus Chun, my old roommate from sophomore year, back when I still had a personality and interests beyond fixing other people's problems. Marcus and I had been tight in college, the kind of friends who stayed up until 4 in the morning arguing about whether hot dogs were sandwiches and if cereal counted as soup. He'd gone on to start a tech repair shop out in Colorado, Denver, specifically, and we'd kept in vague touch through the occasional happy birthday text and ironic meme exchange. I hadn't seen him in person in probably 5 years, but when I called him at 7 in the morning Mountain Time because I'd forgotten about time zones, he answered like we'd just talked yesterday. "Noah Reed," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. To what do I owe the pleasure of a call before my first cup of coffee? Did somebody die? Or did you finally realize your life is a tragedy? Option B, I said. I need a job and a place to crash. Possibly immediately. Definitely within 2 weeks. There was a pause, and then Marcus said, "You look like a man fresh out of a hostage situation," which made no sense because we were on the phone and he couldn't see me, but somehow it was exactly the right thing to say. "Close enough," I replied, and just like that, I had an escape plan. Marcus needed someone to run operations at his shop. Apparently, he was great at fixing computers, but terrible at things like showing up on time and remembering to pay the electric bill. The job paid decent, came with a small apartment above the shop that was currently being used for storage, and most importantly, it was 1,700 miles away from everyone who'd spent 30 years forgetting I existed. It was perfect. It was terrifying. It was happening. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in lying by omission. I went to work at my dad's company like normal, pushing papers and fixing the constant stream of problems that apparently only I knew how to solve, while secretly copying all my personal files onto a flash drive and deleting every trace of my actual work from the system. Let them figure out how to run their invoicing software without me. I went to family dinners and nodded along while my mom complained about the caterer at some fundraiser and Eli bragged about his latest failed business venture. I came home to Rachel and listened to her talk about her day, her friends, her problems, her everything, while she asked me exactly 0 questions about mine. It was remarkably easy to pretend everything was normal because everything was normal. I just finally realized that normal was killing me. I sold my car, a 10-year-old Honda that I'd maintained meticulously because that's what I did with everything in my life. Some college kid bought it off Craigslist for $3,000 cash, and I felt weirdly emotional watching him drive away in it, like I was saying goodbye to the last piece of the old Noah. I opened a new bank account at a different bank and slowly transferred money over in amounts small enough that Rachel wouldn't notice, which wasn't hard because she never looked at our finances anyway. I packed one suitcase, just one, because I wanted to travel light, and also because most of my stuff was either broken from lending it to family members or so tied to memories I wanted to forget that leaving it behind felt therapeutic. The night before I left, I cooked dinner one last time. Spaghetti carbonara, Rachel's favorite, because even though I was leaving her, I wasn't a complete monster. She ate it while watching TikToks, laughing at videos I couldn't see, existing in my presence without actually acknowledging my existence. It was like being a ghost, except ghosts usually get more attention. After she went to bed, I sat down and wrote the note. I must have started it 20 different times, trying to find the right words to explain 3 decades of feeling invisible, but eventually I realized there were no right words. So I kept it simple. I stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pineapple that Rachel had bought during some girl's trip to Hawaii I'd paid for, but wasn't invited to. The note said, "Since you all forgot me, I'll make it official. I'm gone. Don't worry. I'll send you an invoice for 30 years of unpaid labor." I left at 5 in the morning, before Rachel woke up, before the sun came up, before I could second-guess myself into staying. Milo was the hardest part. I knelt down and hugged him. This perfect dog who'd never asked me for anything except walks and belly rubs, and who loved me unconditionally in a way humans apparently couldn't manage. "Take care of her," I whispered into his fur, even though we both knew he was better at that job than I'd ever been. I'd arranged for a dog walker to come by later that day because I wasn't about to leave him without food, which probably says something about my priorities, but whatever. The bus to Denver left at 6:30 from a station downtown that smelled like regret and industrial cleaner. I'd sold my car, remember, so public transportation it was. I sat in the back with my single suitcase and watched my city disappear through the grimy window. All those familiar buildings and streets where I'd spent my entire life being someone I didn't want to be anymore. My phone buzzed around 9. Rachel, finally awake, finally realizing I wasn't there. I turned it off without reading the message. Whatever she had to say, I'd heard it before in 1,000 different ways. I was overreacting, being dramatic, abandoning my responsibilities. But here's the thing. You can't abandon people who never actually had you in the first place. Marcus picked me up from the Denver bus station 16 hours later, looking exactly the same except with better glasses and a beard that suggested he'd given up on impressing anyone. "You look like hell," he said cheerfully, grabbing my suitcase. "I feel like freedom," I replied, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I smiled and meant it. Turns out, rebuilding your entire personality from scratch is kind of like learning to walk again, except instead of taking your first steps as a toddler, while proud parents cheer you on, you're a 30-year-old man trying to figure out if you actually like coffee or if you've just been drinking it for a decade because someone else told you to. Spoiler alert, I didn't even like coffee. I'd been forcing down bitter bean water every morning for years because Rachel said it made me seem more professional, and I'd just accepted that as fact like some kind of caffeinated sheep. Turns out, when you're not performing for an audience that isn't watching anyway, you can drink whatever the hell you want. Revolutionary concept, I know. The apartment above Marcus's shop was exactly as advertised, small, slightly dusty, and filled with boxes of old computer parts that he swore he'd get around to organizing eventually, which in Marcus speak meant never. It was 1 room plus a bathroom, with a kitchenette that was really just a hot plate and a mini fridge pretending to be a kitchen. The mattress was on the floor because neither of us owned a bed frame, and the only window looked out onto an alley where a stray cat I named Gerald would occasionally scream at 3 in the morning for reasons known only to him. It was, without exaggeration, the most beautiful place I'd ever lived. No memories attached to the walls. No expectations hanging in the air like humidity. No ghost of the person I'd been haunting every corner. Just space, literal and metaphorical. To figure out who Noah Reed actually was when nobody was asking him to be anything else. I started small, because that's what you do when you're basically learning to be human again. First mission, figure out what I actually like to drink in the mornings. I went to a coffee shop, one of those aggressively hip Denver places where everyone has a man bun and opinions about pour-over techniques. And I stood at the counter like an idiot for probably 5 full minutes reading the menu like it was written in Aramaic. The barista, this kid who couldn't have been more than 22 with gauges the size of quarters in his ears, finally took pity on me. First time, he asked, not unkindly. You look lost. I'm trying to figure out what I like, I said, which probably sounded philosophical and weird, but he just nodded like that was a completely normal thing to say at 8 in the morning. Respect, man. Here, try this. He made me something called a honey lavender latte, which sounded like something Rachel would have mocked me for ordering, which meant it was exactly what I needed to try. I took a sip, and holy hell, it was like drinking a hug. Sweet, but not too sweet. Floral, but not like I was eating a bouquet. Warm and comforting in a way that gas station coffee had never been. I went back the next day and ordered the same thing. And the day after that. And the day after that. Until the barista, whose name was apparently Jasper, because of course it was, just started making it when he saw me walk in. Honey lavender for the guy finding himself, he'd announce, and I'd pay my $4.50 and go to work feeling like maybe, possibly, I was starting to become an actual person with actual preferences instead of a collection of other people's expectations wearing a human suit. The haircut was next on my list of small rebellions. I'd been going to the same barber for 8 years, this old-school place near my parents' house where the guy barely spoke and just gave everyone the same conservative cut that made you look like you were about to sell someone insurance. Rachel had insisted on it because it was clean and professional, which I now realize was code for boring and forgettable. So I walked into a different place, a trendy barbershop in downtown Denver with exposed brick walls and a playlist that was actually good, and I told the stylist, a woman with half her head shaved and the other half dyed purple, to do whatever she wanted. Whatever I want, she repeated, like I'd just handed her the nuclear codes. Surprise me. Just make it not scream middle child energy. She laughed so hard she snorted, and then she went to work. 45 minutes later, I walked out with something that actually had style, shorter on the sides, textured on top, the kind of cut that suggested I might have a personality lurking somewhere under the surface. Marcus took one look at me when I got to the shop and said, "Who are you and what did you do with boring Noah?" Which I chose to take as a compliment. But the biggest change, the one that actually required rewiring my entire brain, was learning to say no. Just the word. 2 letters. 1 syllable. Should have been easy, but I'd spent 30 years treating no like a forbidden word, something that would make people angry or disappointed or stop loving me, as if their love was conditional on my constant availability. Marcus became my accidental teacher in this, mostly because he asked me for things constantly and didn't give a damn if I said no. Hey Noah, can you cover the shop tomorrow? I've got a dentist appointment. Old Noah would have said yes immediately, canceled whatever plans he had, and shown up early to make sure everything was perfect. New Noah took a breath and said, "Actually, I can't. I've got plans." I didn't have plans. I was going to sit in my apartment and read a book, which apparently counted as plans now, because reading for pleasure was something I'd forgotten existed during my years of servitude. Marcus just shrugged. Cool, I'll reschedule. And that was it. The world didn't end. He didn't guilt-trip me or make passive-aggressive comments or treat me differently. He just accepted it. Like saying no was a normal thing that normal people did. What a concept. Work itself became this weird source of actual satisfaction, which was a new feeling because working at my dad's company had felt like being a hamster on a wheel. Lots of running, no actual progress, and someone watching you the whole time judging your performance. But at Marcus's shop, I was actually good at stuff. Like, objectively, measurably good. I reorganized the entire inventory system in the first month, implemented a scheduling software that cut our booking confusion in half, and apparently had a gift for explaining technical problems to confused customers without making them feel like idiots, which Marcus said was worth its weight in gold because most tech people have the social skills of angry raccoons. 6 months in, Marcus made me operations manager, which came with a raise and the kind of responsibility that felt earned instead of dumped on me. A year after that, the shop had expanded. We'd hired 2 more people, and I was basically running the whole operation while Marcus handled the technical repairs he actually enjoyed. "You're shockingly efficient when you're not being yelled at constantly," Marcus observed one day, and he wasn't wrong. Turns out, when you work in an environment where people appreciate you instead of expect you to be psychic about their needs, you actually want to do a good job. But the real gift Colorado gave me wasn't the job or the apartment or the honey lavender lattes or even the haircut that made me look like I might be interesting at parties. It was Marcus and his wife, Leah. Leah was basically Marcus's opposite. Organized where he was chaotic, punctual where he was perpetually late, the kind of person who meal prepped on Sundays and actually used her planner instead of letting it collect dust on a shelf. She was a nurse at Denver General, which meant she'd seen enough human suffering that my sad backstory barely registered as a blip, but she was kind about it anyway. They started inviting me to dinners, casual stuff at first. "Hey, we're grilling burgers. Want to come over?" And I kept waiting for the catch, for the moment when they'd ask me to fix their sink or help them move or do literally anything that required me to be useful instead of just present. But it never came. They just wanted me there. They asked me questions about my day and actually listened to the answers. They remembered things I'd mentioned in passing, like how I'd been wanting to try hiking, and then showed up at my apartment one Saturday with extra boots and a trail map. And then, on my 31st birthday, my first birthday in Denver, my first birthday as the new Noah, they threw me a party. Nothing fancy, just the 3 of us and a few people from the shop. But there was a homemade cake that Leah had baked and actual presents that people had actually put thought into. And when they sang happy birthday, I realized I was crying like an absolute baby and didn't even care. Marcus handed me a beer and said, "You good, man?" And all I could say was, "Yeah, I'm good. I'm really good." And the wildest part? I actually meant it. 3 years is apparently the exact amount of time it takes for a person to completely rebuild themselves from the ground up, because by the time my 33rd birthday rolled around, I barely recognized the guy I'd been when I stepped off that bus in Denver with one suitcase and a personality crisis. That Noah would have spent his birthday waiting for someone else to acknowledge him, hoping for scraps of attention, probably cooking dinner for people who wouldn't show up. This Noah had planned himself a solo camping trip to Rocky Mountain National Park, had already packed his brand new tent that he'd bought with his own money without feeling guilty about it, and was currently sitting in his significantly larger apartment. I'd upgraded 6 months ago to a place with actual rooms and everything. Drinking an espresso from the machine Marcus and Leah had gotten me for Christmas because apparently I was the kind of person who had friends who bought him thoughtful gifts now. The espresso machine was one of those fancy Italian numbers that made sounds like a small spaceship and cost more than my first car, and every time I used it, I felt like I was committing some kind of bourgeois crime. But damn if it didn't make the best coffee I'd ever had, and I'd become the kind of person who could tell the difference between a good pull and a great pull, which would have made college-age Noah laugh until he cried. I was planning my route for the camping trip, spreading maps across my coffee table like I was plotting a heist, when my video doorbell, another recent purchase, because apparently I'd become a responsible adult with home security, buzzed with that distinctive chime that meant someone was at my door. Now, I lived in a building with a security system that required buzzing people in downstairs, which meant whoever was at my actual apartment door had either been let in by another tenant or had somehow bypassed building security, neither of which seemed particularly comforting. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone, expecting to see a delivery guy with a package or maybe my neighbor Dave who occasionally forgot his keys and needed to use my fire escape. And instead I saw something that made my brain completely short-circuit like someone had poured water into my cerebral cortex. My mother stood there, Martha Reed in the flesh, wearing what I recognized as her very serious business outfit. A cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's rent, perfectly pressed pants, the pearl necklace my dad had given her for their 20th anniversary that she wore when she needed to look like old money. Her hair was done, her makeup was immaculate, and she was clutching her designer handbag. That ridiculous Louis Vuitton thing she'd bought to match one that her friend Patricia had, with both hands like it was a life preserver and she was drowning. But it was her face that really got me. Martha Reed did not do panic. Martha Reed did controlled concern, strategic worry, carefully calibrated distress designed to manipulate specific emotional responses. But this was actual, genuine panic, the kind that made her eyes too wide and her mouth too tight, and her whole carefully constructed facade crack like old paint. And she wasn't alone, because of course she wasn't. Behind her, looking equally uncomfortable in ways I hadn't seen in years, stood Rachel and Eli. Rachel had aged, not badly, but noticeably. She'd cut her hair shorter, and she wasn't wearing makeup, which was weird because Rachel wore makeup to take out the trash. She looked tired in that bone-deep way that suggested she hadn't slept properly in months, and her clothes, while still nice, had that slightly worn quality that came from being worn too many times without replacement. Eli looked even worse, if I'm being honest. My brother, who'd spent his entire life coasting on looks and charm, had developed stress lines around his eyes and mouth that made him look 10 years older than he actually was. His shirt was wrinkled. Eli, Mr. I only wear things that cost 3 figures, was wearing a wrinkled shirt, and he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot like a kid who needed to pee but was too afraid to ask. I stared at my phone screen for a solid 30 seconds, watching this bizarre tableau of my former life standing on my doorstep 1,700 miles from where they should be, trying to process what the hell was happening. Part of me wanted to just not answer, to pretend I wasn't home, to let them stand there until they gave up and left. But curiosity is a powerful drug, and also I'm apparently still enough of a people pleaser that even after 3 years of therapy. Yeah, I'd started actual therapy, with an actual therapist who wasn't Google, and it was amazing. I couldn't quite bring myself to leave my elderly mother standing in a hallway, regardless of how many birthdays she'd forgotten. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, trying to project the energy of someone who was mildly inconvenienced rather than internally screaming. Well, I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded, this is unexpected. My mom's face did something complicated, cycling through relief and guilt, and something that might have been actual emotion before settling on her default setting of controlled urgency. Noah, thank God you're okay. She moved like she was going to hug me, and I took a step back, holding up one hand in the universal gesture for absolutely not. Well, I wasn't dead, I said, but thanks for checking 3 years late. Really appreciate the concern. The sarcasm was thick enough to spread on toast, but apparently my family's ability to miss social cues had not diminished with time. We've been trying to find you. Eli jumped in, and wow, his voice had taken on this whiny quality I didn't remember, like he'd been practicing his victim voice for a talent show. You disappeared, man. Just gone. No forwarding address, no phone number, nothing. Yeah, that was kind of the point, I replied, still not moving from my position blocking the doorway. It's called leaving. People do it when they're tired of being forgotten. I looked at Rachel, who was staring at her shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Nice to see you too, Rachel. Love what you've done with your hair. Very I've given up, but in a stylish way. She flinched, which gave me more satisfaction than it probably should have. But I'm only human, and I've earned a little pettiness. Noah, she started, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Can we please come in? We need to talk to you. It's important. Everything's always important when you need something, I observed. But I stepped aside anyway, because apparently 3 years of personal growth hadn't completely eliminated my inability to turn away people I used to care about. They filed into my apartment like refugees entering a safe zone, and I watched their eyes take in my space. The decent furniture I'd bought myself, the framed art on the walls that I'd chosen because I liked it not because it matched a color scheme, the espresso machine gleaming on the counter like a chrome monument to my independence. The camping gear spread across the coffee table advertising the fact that I had plans and a life that didn't include them. Nice place, my mom said, and there was genuine surprise in her voice, like she'd expected to find me living in squalor as punishment for abandoning the family. You've done well for yourself. Turns out I'm shockingly competent when I'm not spending all my time and energy being everyone's unpaid servant, I said cheerfully, moving to lean against my kitchen counter with my arms crossed. So, what brings the Reed family reunion tour to Colorado? Please tell me someone died and left me money, because that's about the only reason I can think of that you'd all show up here together. They exchanged glances, that weird silent communication that families develop where entire conversations happen through eye contact. Finally, Eli cleared his throat. We need to talk to you about some stuff. Financial stuff. Financial stuff. I repeated slowly, tasting the words. Let me guess. Things aren't going great back home. I looked at them more carefully, really seeing them now instead of just reacting to their presence. The worn clothes. The stress lines. The desperation hanging in the air like cheap cologne. Oh my God, I said, and I started laughing. I couldn't help it. Oh my God, you're broke. You're all broke, aren't you? The silence that followed was its own answer, and honestly, it was the best birthday present I could have asked for. The thing about Schadenfreude is that it's supposed to make you feel guilty, like you're a bad person for taking pleasure in other people's misery. But sitting there in my carefully curated apartment, watching my former family squirm on my IKEA couch, which, by the way, I'd assembled myself without calling anyone for help, a personal milestone, I felt exactly zero guilt. Just this warm, glowing sensation in my chest that I can only describe as vindication having a party with karma, and I'm the guest of honor. They looked wrecked, not in the fun, we partied too hard way, but in the life has chewed us up and spit us out, way that suggested the universe had finally decided to balance its books. My mom was the first to break the silence, because Martha Reed did not do uncomfortable quiet. She cleared her throat with that delicate little sound she made when she was about to say something she didn't want to say, like admitting that the caterer had messed up the hors d'oeuvres or that her favorite reality TV star had been arrested for tax fraud. Noah, sweetheart, she began, and the sweetheart made my eye twitch because she'd never called me that when I actually lived there. We heard through some mutual acquaintances that you're quite successful now. Running operations for a tech company, they said, making quite a good living. Tech repair shop, I corrected, because accuracy mattered. And yeah, turns out when you're not constantly being summoned to fix other people's problems for free, you have time to actually be good at your job. Crazy how that works. I grabbed a bottle of water from my fridge, just for me, because I wasn't offering them anything, and took a long sip while they watched like I was drinking liquid gold. But please, continue. This is fascinating. Rachel jumped in, probably because my mom was taking too long to get to the point. Your dad's company went under, she said bluntly, and wow, direct Rachel was new and unsettling. About 18 months ago, the bankruptcy was bad, really bad. I blinked. Richard Reed's company, the one he'd built his entire identity around, the corporate empire that was more important to him than his own children, had crashed and burned? How bad is really bad? I asked, genuinely curious now. Like, had to sell the boat bad? Or living in a cardboard box bad? They lost the house, Eli said quietly, not meeting my eyes. And the cars. And pretty much everything except Mom's jewelry, which she's been slowly selling to cover basic expenses. The house. The 4-bedroom colonial in the nice neighborhood with the professionally landscaped yard that I'd mowed for free every summer. The house where I'd grown up feeling like a live-in employee rather than a son. Gone. I tried to feel something about that. Sadness, maybe, or nostalgia for childhood memories. But all I felt was a weird sense of detachment, like they were telling me about strangers. Huh, I said. That's unfortunate. So where are you living now? With Patricia and Bob, my mom admitted, and the shame in her voice was almost palpable. Patricia and Bob were the neighbors she'd spent 20 years competing with, the ones she'd tried to outdo with bigger Christmas decorations and more expensive cars and louder bragging about her children's accomplishments. Back when she thought her children had accomplishments worth bragging about. Living with them must have been absolute torture for her ego. They've been very generous, but it's temporary. Patricia's been generous? I said, unable to keep the disbelief out of my voice. Patricia, I called the HOA on you for having your trash cans visible for 6 extra hours, Patricia. That's gotta sting. My mom's face tightened, but she pushed on. Your father is trying to start over, but at his age, and with the bankruptcy on his record. She trailed off, which was Martha Reed code for, it's not going well, and I don't want to say it out loud. And you? I turned to Eli, whose whole vibe screamed, please don't ask me specifics. Let me guess. Those investments you were always bragging about tanked. Crypto, he mumbled, like it was a confession at a church. And some NFTs that turned out to be, worthless. I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing, because of course Eli had dumped money into crypto and NFTs. Of course he had. That was so perfectly on brand for someone who'd spent his entire life looking for get-rich-quick schemes instead of doing actual work. Let me guess, I said. You bought in at the peak, didn't you? Right when everyone and their grandma was talking about how Bitcoin was going to the moon. Can we not do this? Eli snapped, finally showing some emotion beyond shame. I know I messed up, okay? I lost everything. Everything. I'm living in Patricia and Bob's basement, Noah. Their basement that smells like cat piss and broken dreams. To be fair, I said, that's not just Patricia's basement. That's most basements. I turned my attention to Rachel, who'd been unusually quiet. And you, my dear ex-wife? How's life treating you? She looked up, and for the first time, I saw actual vulnerability in her eyes instead of the carefully crafted image she usually projected. I lost my job 2 years ago, she said softly. Marketing position got eliminated during downsizing. I've been freelancing, but it's not steady. And without your income, I couldn't afford the house, so I had to sell it. At a loss, because the market was bad. I'm renting a studio now. 1 room, Noah. 1 room with a hot plate and a bathroom I share with the roaches. There was a time when hearing that Rachel was struggling would have destroyed me, would have made me want to swoop in and fix everything like I always had. But that Noah was dead, buried somewhere between Denver and the life I'd left behind. This Noah just nodded and said, that does sound rough. Have you tried not spending $300 on brunch? Her face flushed. That's not fair. Neither was forgetting my birthday to go party with my family. But here we are, 3 years later, finally having this conversation. The room went silent again, and I could practically hear them recalibrating their approach. This wasn't going how they'd planned. They'd probably expected me to be the same old Noah, ready to jump at the chance to be needed again, eager to sacrifice myself on the altar of family obligation. But that Noah had left the building, and in his place was this newer, shinier version who'd learned to say no and mean it. Finally, my mom played her trump card. Your father's sick, Noah. His heart. The stress from everything. The bankruptcy, losing the business he built. It's taken a toll. He needs medication, ongoing treatment, and we don't have the money. Her voice cracked, and I couldn't tell if it was genuine emotion or decades of practice at manipulation. Probably both. That's terrible, I said, and I meant it, sort of. I didn't want my dad to die or anything, but I also wasn't about to light myself on fire to keep him warm. Have you looked into Medicaid? There are programs for people in financial hardship. I could send you some links if you'd like. Noah, please, Rachel said. Standing up like physical height would make her more persuasive. We're not asking for much. Just some help to get back on our feet. You're doing so well, and we're family. Family. I interrupted, and the word came out sharp enough to cut. That's interesting. See, I spent 30 years thinking we were family, thinking that meant something, thinking that family showed up for each other and remembered each other's birthdays and didn't treat each other like unpaid labor. But you know what I learned? Family is just a word people use when they need something. When they want you to do their taxes or fix their sink or bail them out of financial disasters they created themselves. We made mistakes, Eli said, standing up too, like this was a group intervention and I was the one with the problem. We know that. We were stupid and selfish, and we took you for granted. But come on, bro. We're blood. That has to count for something. You only remember that word when you need Wi-Fi or money. I shot back, and the satisfaction of finally saying what I'd been thinking for 3 years was intoxicating. When I lived there, when I was available and useful and fixing all your problems, blood didn't matter. I was just the guy who showed up. The handyman. The fixer. But now that you're desperate and broke and I'm the one with resources, now blood matters. Now we're family. That's convenient timing. My mom stood up slowly, her composure cracking further. Noah Reed, I raised you better than this. To turn your back on your family in their time of need. You raised me to be useful, I corrected her. There's a difference. And as for turning my back, I learned from the best. Remember my 30th birthday, Mom? The one where you, Dad, Eli, and my wife all went to a party without me? Where Rachel posted pictures laughing about forgetting I existed. That was a masterclass in turning your back on family. I'm just applying the lessons you taught me. The truth hung in the air between us like smoke, and I watched it settle on them, watched them realize that I wasn't the same person they'd left behind. I'd changed. I'd grown. I'd become someone who knew his worth, and it was worth more than they'd ever been willing to pay. The silence that followed my little speech was the kind of thick, suffocating quiet you get right before a thunderstorm, when the air pressure changes and everything feels wrong. My mom sat back down heavily, like her legs had given out, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw Martha Reed look genuinely defeated. Not the performative kind of defeat she'd pull out at charity events when her fundraising numbers weren't quite what she'd hoped for, but actual, bone-deep exhaustion. Eli was staring at his shoes again, which seemed to be his new favorite hobby, and Rachel had her arms wrapped around herself like she was physically trying to hold herself together. Part of me, a very small, very stupid part that apparently hadn't gotten the memo about personal growth, wanted to take it back, to apologize, to say I didn't mean it, and of course I'd help, because that's what the old Noah would have done. But the new Noah, the one who'd spent 3 years learning to value himself, stayed quiet and let them sit with the discomfort they'd created. "You've changed," my mom finally said, and it wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation, delivered with the same tone she'd used to tell someone they'd committed a social faux pas at a dinner party. "You're not the boy I raised." "You're absolutely right," I agreed, and I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. "I'm not. That boy died on his 30th birthday while eating bread with a candle stuck in it, alone in a house he'd spent all day decorating for people who never showed up. This is who grew from his ashes, and honestly, I like him a lot better. He has boundaries, and a personality, and friends who actually remember he exists." "We remembered you," Eli protested weakly, but even he didn't sound convinced. "We just got busy. For 3 years." I raised an eyebrow. "Damn, that must have been some party. Did it just never end? Was it like that movie where the same day keeps repeating, except instead of learning a valuable lesson, you all just kept being terrible?" Rachel found her voice again, and when she spoke, there was a desperate quality to it that I'd never heard before. "Noah, I know we hurt you. I know we took advantage of you. I know I was a terrible wife. But doesn't the fact that we came all this way, that we found you, that we're here admitting we were wrong, doesn't that count for something?" I considered this, actually gave it real thought instead of just reacting. "You know what?" I said slowly. "It does count for something. It counts as proof that you're capable of effort when you're motivated by self-interest. You spent 3 years not bothering to check if I was alive, but the second you needed money, suddenly you've got the resources to track me down across state lines. That's actually impressive in a deeply depressing way. Like, if you'd put that much effort into being a decent family when I was around, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. So you're just going to let us suffer?" Eli asked, and there it was, the guilt trip I'd been waiting for. "You're going to sit up here in your nice apartment with your fancy coffee machine and your camping trips while your own family struggles to survive? That's who you are now." "First of all," I said, holding up one finger, "that coffee machine was a gift from people who actually care about me, so don't you dare drag it into this. Second, I'm not letting you do anything. You're suffering because of choices you made. Dad built a company on shaky foundations and refused to adapt when the market changed. Mom spent decades living beyond her means to impress people who didn't actually like her. You dumped your money into meme coins because you thought you could get rich without working. And Rachel," I turned to her, "you married a man you didn't respect and then acted surprised when he stopped wanting to be disrespected. None of that is my fault, and none of it is my responsibility to fix." My mom stood up again, and this time there was fire in her eyes, that old familiar anger that came out whenever someone challenged her worldview. "How dare you speak to me like that? I'm your mother. I gave birth to you, raised you, sacrificed for you." "Sacrificed what exactly?" I interrupted, and I was done being polite. 3 years of therapy had taught me that sometimes you have to lance the boil to let the infection out, even if it's messy. Your social calendar? Your tennis lessons? Please, enlighten me about all the sacrifices you made, because from where I was standing, the only person doing any sacrificing in our family was me. I sacrificed my time, my energy, my self-respect, my birthday, my marriage, and damn near my sanity, trying to be enough for people who would never see me as more than a tool they could use. "Your father's health," she started, pulling out the big guns, but I cut her off. "Wasn't he at that party too?" I asked, and my voice was calm, eerily calm. "That fancy charity gala on my birthday? The one where you all got dressed up and had champagne and forgot I existed? Yeah, I remember. Funny how his health was fine when he was networking with the country club crowd. But now that he needs something from me, suddenly it's a crisis. Guess karma RSVP'd early to that party after all. The look on my mom's face was somewhere between shock and fury, like I'd just slapped her across the face with a fish. Good. Let her feel a fraction of what I'd felt reading that text message, seeing that photo, realizing that the people who were supposed to love me couldn't even remember the day I was born. You know what the funniest thing is? I continued, and I was on a roll now. 3 years of unspoken thoughts pouring out like water from a broken dam. My absence was the best thing that ever happened to me. Best thing. I got a job where people appreciate me. I made friends who show up when they say they will. I learned what I actually like instead of just accepting what other people told me to like. I started therapy, worked through my codependency issues, and built a life I'm actually proud of. I wake up every morning and I don't dread the day. Do you know how revolutionary that is? Do you have any idea what it's like to not spend every waking moment waiting for someone to need something from you? I looked at each of them in turn. My mother with her designer handbag and her wounded pride, my brother with his wrinkled shirt and his cryptocurrency regrets, my ex-wife with her studio apartment and her roaches. And my absence was the worst thing that ever happened to you. Not because you loved me or missed me or valued me as a person, but because I was the load-bearing wall in a house of cards. I was the one keeping everything running, fixing everything that broke, holding everything together while you all just assumed it would always be that way. And when I left, the whole thing collapsed. That's not love. That's dependency. And I'm done being someone's crutch. Rachel's eyes were wet, and I couldn't tell if they were genuine tears or the manipulative kind she'd perfected over years of getting her way. So that's it? She asked, her voice breaking. We drove all this way, admitted we were wrong, asked for help, and you're just going to say no? I'm going to tell you what you should have told me 3 years ago, I said, walking to my door and opening it in the universal signal that this conversation was over. I've got plans. Important plans that don't include you. Camping plans, actually, up in the mountains where there's no cell service and no guilt trips and no one asking me to be smaller so they can feel bigger. And those plans matter more to me than your emergency, because here's something I learned. Your emergency is not my obligation. Not anymore. They stood up slowly, gathering their things with the defeated energy of people who'd just realized they'd already lost a war they didn't know they were fighting. Eli paused at the door, and for a second I thought he might say something genuine, something real, but he just shook his head and walked past me into the hallway. Rachel followed, not making eye contact, and I wondered if she was finally understanding what she'd lost or just calculating her next move. My mom was the last to leave, and she stopped in the doorway, turning to face me one more time. You'll regret this, she said, and it was meant to sound ominous, but just came out sad. Family is family, Noah. You can't just walk away from that. Watch me, I replied, and I closed the door. I stood there for a moment, listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway, listening to the elevator ding and carry them away. And then I waited for the guilt to hit, for the crushing weight of family obligation to come crashing down and make me feel like a monster for turning them away. I waited for the voice in my head that had spent 30 years telling me I was only worthy if I was useful, that love was something you earned through service, that saying no made you a bad person. But it never came. The guilt never showed up. Instead, what I felt was relief. Pure, clean, uncomplicated relief. Like I'd just set down a backpack I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there. They'd left quietly, and I felt nothing but grateful for the silence they left behind. The next morning, I woke up to approximately 73 text messages, which seemed excessive until I realized they were all from Marcus and fell into roughly 3 categories. Logistical questions about my camping trip, memes about cryptocurrency failures that he thought I'd appreciate given yesterday's visitors, and increasingly unhinged messages asking if I was okay, because apparently Leah had convinced him I might be having an emotional crisis. Dude, she made me promise to check on you. The last message read. She says people who get ambushed by their toxic families need emotional support and probably carbs. Her words, not mine. Well, the carbs part is mine. Come over for breakfast. I smiled at my phone. Actually smiled, not the fake performative smile I'd worn for 30 years, but a genuine one that reached my eyes, and texted back, I'm good, better than good, but I'll never say no to carbs. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Marcus and Leah's kitchen, which was the kind of chaotic but cozy space that suggested people actually live there instead of just using it as a showroom for their matching appliances. There were kid drawings on the fridge, their niece and nephew visited every weekend, grocery lists written on a whiteboard, a coffee maker that was objectively inferior to mine, but somehow made better coffee because it was used by people who genuinely liked each other. Leah was at the stove making what appeared to be enough pancakes to feed a small army, her scrubs already on because she had a shift at noon, but had insisted on feeding me first. "So," she said without turning around, flipping a pancake with the casual expertise of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Marcus told me you had visitors yesterday. Your family." The way she said family had air quotes around it, which I appreciated. "Former family," I corrected, stealing a piece of bacon from the plate on the counter. "They drove all the way from Connecticut to ask for money because apparently karma exists and she's been working overtime." Marcus snorted into his coffee. "Did you give them the money?" "I gave them a life lesson and directions to the door," I said. "Not necessarily in that order." Leah turned around, spatula in hand, and gave me this look that was part proud, part concerned, like a teacher watching a student finally stand up to a bully, but worried about the fallout. "And how do you feel about that?" she asked, which was such a therapist question that I had to laugh. Like I just finished the hardest workout of my life, I admitted. Exhausted, but in a good way. Like I proved something to myself. I paused, trying to find the right words. They wanted me to feel guilty. That was the whole plan. Show up, tell me how bad things are, make me feel like a terrible person for having boundaries, and then I'd crack and become their personal ATM/handyman/emotional support animal again. But the guilt never came. I just felt free. "That's because you did the work," Leah said, sliding a stack of pancakes in front of me that could have fed 3 people. "Therapy, setting boundaries, building a life that doesn't revolve around other people's needs. You earned this freedom, Noah. Don't let them take it from you." We ate breakfast. Well, I ate while Marcus inhaled his food like he was in a competitive eating contest, and Leah picked at hers while stealing bacon from both our plates, and talked about everything except my family. Marcus told a story about a customer who'd brought in a laptop he'd apparently tried to fix himself using duct tape and prayer, which had gone about as well as you'd expect. Leah complained about hospital politics and a co-worker who microwaved fish in the break room, which is apparently a violation of the Geneva Conventions. It was normal and boring and absolutely perfect, the kind of mundane conversation that only happens between people who aren't keeping score. I went back to my apartment around 11 to finish packing for my camping trip, feeling lighter than I had in days. I'd just zipped up my sleeping bag when there was another knock on my door, and for a brief, horrible second, I thought my family had come back for round 2. But when I checked the video doorbell, I saw Marcus and Leah standing there with what appeared to be several other people from the shop. Jamie, our newest repair tech who had a concerning addiction to energy drinks. Sarah, who ran our social media and could make even a broken motherboard look aesthetically pleasing on Instagram. And Tom, our oldest employee who'd been with Marcus since the beginning and had opinions about everything. I opened the door, confused. Did I miss a memo about a staff meeting at my apartment? Surprise, Leah yelled, which was when I noticed she was holding a cake. An actual, honest-to-God birthday cake with candles and everything, decorated with what appeared to be a tent and mountains made of frosting. "We know your birthday's not until tomorrow, but you're leaving for your trip tonight, so we're doing it now." "You guys," I started, and goddammit, I was getting emotional again. When did I become such a crier? Oh right, when I finally started having feelings that weren't just resignation and exhaustion. "You didn't have to. Shut up and accept the love, Reed," Marcus said, pushing past me with a bag that clinked suspiciously like it contained beer. "We're celebrating whether you like it or not." They filed into my apartment, all 6 of them, and suddenly my space that had felt big enough for one person felt exactly the right size for this many people who actually wanted to be there. Sarah started hanging decorations she'd apparently smuggled in. Paper streamers in my favorite color, which meant someone had paid attention to the fact that I liked forest green. Tom set up his Bluetooth speaker and started playing music that was actually good instead of the terrible top 40 stuff that Rachel used to insist on. Jamie handed me a card that everyone had signed, filled with inside jokes from work and genuine birthday wishes that made my throat tight. "Speech," Marcus demanded, popping open a beer and handing it to me. Say something profound about aging or life, or whatever. I'm 33, I protested. That's not old enough to be profound. That's just old enough to finally understand how taxes work. Barely. Leah interjected, lighting the candles on the cake. You asked me 3 questions about your W for last month. In my defense, the W4 is purposely confusing so the government can laugh at us, I said, which got a round of agreement from everyone because apparently universal truths transcend social groups. They sang happy birthday, and it was objectively terrible. Tom was tone deaf, Jamie was too loud, and Marcus changed the words to happy birthday, you magnificent bastard, but it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. These people, who'd known me for 3 years instead of 30, who had no obligation to care about me beyond being co-workers, had shown up to celebrate me. Not because they needed something, not because I'd fixed their problems, not because family obligation had guilt them into it, just because they wanted to, because they thought I was worth celebrating for no reason other than I existed, and they liked the fact that I existed. Leah handed me the cake with its 3 and 3 candles still flickering. Make a wish, she said, and there was something in her eyes that suggested she already knew what my answer would be. I looked around at these people crammed into my apartment, at the decorations they'd hung and the cake they'd brought and the genuine smiles on their faces, and I realized something profound after all. Wishes only work if you're wishing for something you don't already have. And I already had everything I'd ever actually wanted. People who showed up, who remembered, who cared without expecting anything in return. People who celebrated me just for being me, not for being useful. Already came true, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I'm finally around people who show up. I blew out the candles, all 6 of them, in one breath, because apparently I still had enough lung capacity for that. And everyone cheered like I'd accomplished something genuinely impressive instead of just exhaling effectively. We ate cake, which was homemade by Leah, and therefore 1,000 times better than anything from a grocery store, and drank beer, and told stories about the worst repair jobs we'd ever handled. Sarah showed us a TikTok of a cat that had somehow gotten stuck in a toaster, which spiraled into a debate about whether cats were liquid or solid. Tom insisted that his generation's music was objectively superior, which made everyone groan because he said this at least once a week. Jamie accidentally spilled beer on my carpet and immediately offered to pay for professional cleaning, which I waved off because it was just beer and I owned carpet cleaner, and also because this was what normal friendships looked like. Minor accidents that didn't turn into guilt-laden obligations. Around 4 o'clock, people started filtering out because they had lives and plans and responsibilities, hugging me on their way out the door and telling me to have a great camping trip and to not get eaten by bears. But if you do get eaten by bears, Marcus called from the hallway, at least it'll be a better story than I spent my birthday alone eating bread. Setting a low bar there, buddy, I called back, laughing. Leah was the last to leave, pausing at my door with her purse over her shoulder, and that concerned mother look she got sometimes, even though she was only 2 years older than me. You're really okay? She asked quietly. About yesterday? I'm more than okay, I told her honestly. I'm free. And I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. They showed up thinking they still had power over me, thinking I was still that guy who'd sacrifice himself to make them comfortable, and I got to prove to myself that I'm not. I'm someone different now. Someone better. She smiled, reached up to pat my cheek like I was one of her pediatric patients, and said, yeah, you are. Don't forget it. Then she was gone, and I was alone in my apartment with birthday decorations and empty beer bottles and the lingering smell of cake, and I'd never felt less alone in my entire life. That night, I finished packing my car, the new one I'd bought last year, a reliable SUV that I'd chosen myself because I liked the color and the gas mileage, and I drove up into the mountains as the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that looked like they'd been photoshopped, but were just nature showing off. I set up my tent by a lake that was so still it reflected the stars, built a small fire, and sat there listening to the silence that wasn't lonely, just peaceful. I thought about the me from 3 years ago, sitting in a dark kitchen with bread and a candle, feeling invisible and worthless and trapped. I thought about everything I'd survived, the forgotten birthday, the move to a new state, the hard work of rebuilding myself from scratch, the therapy sessions where I'd cried and raged, and slowly learned that I deserved better. I thought about my family showing up desperate and broke, and the guilt that never came, and the relief that filled that space instead. And as I sat there by the fire, warming my hands and watching sparks float up toward the stars like wishes being sent to the universe, I whispered to myself one more time. To the man who finally stopped begging for a seat at the wrong table. The mountains didn't answer, but they didn't need to. I already knew I'd found my place.